After this week's news, I'm fairly sure that I'm either too stupid or too naive to host this program. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. And gentlemen, I'm sure you get the reference. Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Modly has essentially fired Commanding Officer Brett Crozier from the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier. And then shortly after that, decided to give a public address over the public address system on the ship, explaining to the crew what has happened. In the course of doing that, it seems like he's violated the very thing that he says that he relieved Crozier from command because of. Stephen Green, assuming I didn't dangle too many prepositions there, this is a fascinating situation where the acting Secretary of the Navy thinks that he has some sort of confidential privilege when he goes over the public address system on a ship filled with guys who all have smartphones. He in essentially a tirade laced with profanities, explained that the former commanding officer of the ship should not have thought that he could send out an email over unsecured channels in this day of social media and not have that circulate in public. And yet, Stephen, he seems to have done essentially the same thing. What do you make of this, and what should become of him?
Before I answer the question, let me start by saying I am an unabashed Navy partisan, and that's why this stuff gets me
too.
So angry and so worked up to see our Navy in such a bad shape. Listen, we are a maritime trading power. We have been since before we were a country. That is a fact of our economic life. If trade dies, we die, and you don't stay a maritime trade power for very long if you don't have a rock-solid Navy. Somebody comes and takes all your stuff away. That's just the cruel realities of this planet, and that's why you need a strong Navy. Listen, if the worst came to the very worst, you can raise an army pretty damn quickly. You give a bunch of guys some rifles and some training, and you get them out there, and yeah, a lot of people die needlessly, but you can do it in an emergency. The Soviets did it at Stalingrad, for example, just shoving guys across the river, one rifle for every two guys. You hate to do it, but you can do it. You can't build a blue ocean Navy from scratch overnight. It just can't be done. Not only does the shipbuilding take too long, but things like carrier operations take decades of experience. I mean, we have institutional knowledge going on how to operate aircraft carriers that started in the 1920s. We're getting into a century here now of naval aviation. It's one of the most difficult things in the military you can possibly do. And I'm not just talking about building the ships. I'm talking about staffing them. I'm talking about training. I'm talking about developing the operational knowledge you need to successfully do this stuff. It's the most difficult stuff in the world. We're very, very good at it, or at least we used to be. I look at the condition the Navy's in now. They can't build ships. We've got the Zumwalt. There were supposed to be 33 stealth land attack vessels, which I don't even know who was stoned enough to come up with that idea. And now we're down to 3 of them because they don't have a mission. As a result, their main gun, which was supposed to be this amazing thing, doesn't have any ammunition because they can't afford it at the small buy rates that we'd have for just 3 ships. It's an absolute mess. The exception to this, thank goodness, has been our submarine force. The Virginia class attack boats have been a huge success. They're building them now with extra missile tubes so that they'll replace the Ohio guided missile subs that we converted 4 of our ballistic subs from. The subforce is going to save us should something happen before the surface fleet gets its act together. A naval power like us can't be seen in this condition. An aircraft carrier, Scott, isn't just a ship with a bunch of guys and some planes on it. It is a strategic asset. And to have that strategic asset publicly crying for help is absolutely inexcusable. It's unexplainable in a blue water going Navy. I can't believe this happened. I can't believe that the reaction to it has been just as screwed up once it got back to D.C. Oh, wait a minute. We're talking about the Pentagon. Yes, I can.
Bill Whittle, there's a columnist in the Washington Post who says that initially the Pentagon tried to claim that these remarks that the acting Secretary of the Navy made over the public address system on the ship were private. How a public address system could be a venue for private remarks is not entirely clear. But one of the things that occurred to me upon reading this is that the accusation against the commanding officer of the aircraft carrier was, among other things, that he had bucked the chain of command, that he had gone to the public instead of going through the proper channels as he should have. Bill, you and Steve know a lot more about the Navy, but my assumption is there is somebody between acting Secretary of the Navy and the commanding officer of a particular ship, and that maybe the acting Secretary of the Navy wasn't the guy to talk to the crew of that ship.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. I know for Joe Biden said that this is a nearly criminal act having him relieved of command. And civilians look at this and they say, well, what did he do wrong? He's just caring about his people. The kind of statement that Crozier released in that email that leaked is the kind of statement that you would expect to see from somebody who had an overseas corporation, let's say, and who was in real trouble, and maybe they worked for United Fruit Company in Havana or something like that. But I thought it was completely inappropriate from an active duty officer who's commanding one of the 11 most powerful strategic assets we have. And it's not so much the fact that the message was out as the fact that the tone of it I thought was just completely unacceptable. The military is supposed to be the very coolest, and when I say I mean cool under pressure, and heroic and risk and most focus on what actual risks is. For the commanding officer of the USS Theodore Roosevelt to say, we're not at war and sailors shouldn't be dying is a political statement, and it has nothing to do with his problems on board the ship regarding the outbreak of this. I don't think I think it was a relievable offense simply to say that this asset is having difficulties on board. If he'd broadcast into the clear that one of our reactors was down or something, and you give other powers or both of them the knowledge that the Theodore Roosevelt is somehow vulnerable. There's a lot of reasons why I think that captain needed to be relieved. He's a good man. His crew loves him, but it's not really up. Captain's job is to have the crew love him. The captain's job is to have the crew respect him and maintain discipline throughout the course of the tour of duty that they do on board that vessel. With that said, just because you relieve somebody for incompetence doesn't mean you're not incompetent yourself. The way that the acting Secretary of the Navy handled it was appalling. The idea of profanity was appalling. The idea of vilifying the commander was appalling. The commander shouldn't be vilified for his concern for the crew. That's why the crew loves him. The crew loved him because he was concerned for his crew. But what should have been explained in rational, calm, and complimentary terms to Captain Crozier is that it seems that he's lost his way in terms of his understanding of the priorities. The priority of the captain of the USS Roosevelt is not to make sure that his crew is safe or comfortable or even healthy. His job is to maintain that strategic asset is in maximum operating condition, and if he needs help, then he needs to go through secure Navy channels in order to get it. When I first heard the story, Navy captain of aircraft carrier pleads for help, I just said that's demoralizing. It's demoralizing to me, and I think it's demoralizing to a lot of people. All of that to say that the response was handled badly. And to be perfectly honest with you, Scott, what this teaches me, among anything, and the thing that concerns me most about this entire adventure is I'd never given it any thought before, to be honest with you, and I'm a little ashamed of that. But the idea that there might be 5,000 cell phones on board an aircraft carrier, that 5,000 individual people have the ability to record data, record video of what's going on board that ship, and then can upload it to the internet. Is that what actually happened? Because if that's the case, that is just shocking. Far worse than anything that the commander did, far worse than anything the Secretary of the Navy did. If the Secretary of Navy got on board a U.S. aircraft carrier and made an announcement over the public address system, and that was recorded by individual sailors and uploaded to the internet, we got a much, much bigger problem than COVID-19 outbreaks on naval vessels. We have a much bigger problem than that. During the Cold War special I talked about this incredible multi-million-dollar effort that the CIA did successfully to raise a Soviet submarine off the bottom of the ocean, 16,000 feet deep. And all of the money, the time, the effort, the skill, all of it that took, only to end that episode by saying, now the Soviets got a hold of a drunken bar owner who was a wife beater and paid him probably $200,000 over the course of 17 years to give them millions of radio transmissions, far bigger intelligence coup because of a guy named John Walker. And human leaks like this are the primary threat. The idea that somebody could be at sea with a device that has a global positioning system that is capable of determining where that aircraft carrier is to within 3 feet, and the carrier is significantly bigger than 3 feet, that this kind of thing could leak out because, if I understand the story correctly, crew members on board the ship were able to record it coming over the public address system. That is enormously concerning to me. But since the phones are made in our ally China, what could possibly go wrong?
Oh,
and,
Bill,
and I won't say that I know anything about whether a sailor is allowed to use or have a cell phone on the deck. All I know is I heard the recording. But Steve, you were going to say.
Okay, so it came from somewhere.
Yeah, I sure was. One of the reasons a carrier is so survivable, those nuclear power plants let it steam at 32 knots in any direction at full speed for as long as it needs to. So if you've got a fix on that carrier, 30 minutes later, suddenly it can be anywhere in a circle, I think about 700 kilometers square. So that is... You can't target the damn thing. They're just too fast. But if you've got guys with the ability to leak GPS coordinates in real time, forget it. That advantage is gone.
And by the way, they don't have to leak it. It's not like a soldier has to be a traitor. It is possible to access that phone's information. It is possible, and it's entirely possible that the phone I have sitting on my desk right now has been activated and is recording the audio and the video, although they're getting a nice shot of the ceiling. These can be activated by remote control. We know that this can be done. That's why people who have serious security issues in terms of just personal citizens put a piece of tape over the camera on their built-in webcams on some of their devices. But it doesn't even require treason on the part of a sailor. The phone can be interrogated if it's in cell phone range, and I imagine you could boost that signal if you wanted to, and you can simply find out where those phones are. They're a tremendous security risk. I'm not aware of what the protocols are, but I think that is something we should be looking into very, very carefully.
You know, I think the most disturbing thing about this, in addition to what Bill and Steve have mentioned, is how everything involving our military has been made political. The very fact that a commanding officer of a ship decided that he was going to go outside of his chain of command to send out this information about how, I think the last I heard there were 173 coronavirus positive tests on that ship. And ultimately, the commanding officer of the ship himself, as he walked off the gangplank walked down the gangplank, he was also diagnosed as having the virus. That for whatever reason, Captain Crozier felt like he couldn't go through his chain of command directly and to get the help he needed. I don't know why he felt that. Maybe he was acting irrationally. Maybe he was acting rationally and realized that he was stuck in some sort of Army or Navy bureaucracy and was unable to get the help he needed in a timely manner. The fact that the acting Secretary of the Navy then took a hyper-political action by going on and making this address over the public address system on the ship, frankly, was not his role. That should have been handled further down the chain of command. It would be whoever the supervisor for the ship's commander, that would have been the person to make that announcement to the crew. And as Bill suggested, that could have been handled in a much more diplomatic fashion, recognizing the love the crew had for the commanding officer, explaining the reasoning why he had to be removed, and making sure that they understood it was for their own safety. And also letting them understand that the Navy was deeply concerned about their health. What could be, this is kind of like that horror movie Snakes on a Plane. This is, virus on a ship when you're out at sea is a terrifying prospect. So, this could have been handled in many ways in an apolitical manner, in a way that was simply focused on doing the right thing all around. And the most disappointing thing about it all was that the commanding officer of the ship didn't feel like he could do it that way. And then the acting secretary of the Navy didn't feel like he could do it that way. The ship's commander has been relieved of duty. There are now calls for the acting Navy secretary to be relieved of duty. He's just acting. I don't see any problem with the president removing him and replacing him with somebody who can actually do the job rather than just act. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.